When you are writing literature, one of the really easy upgrades you can do is from tier 1 vocabulary to tier 2 vocabulary. And this requires either your general knowledge or a thesaurus. You could use a thesaurus on your phone, a thesaurus in the form of your friend's general knowledge, as in you ask them, or you can use an actual book. It wouldn't matter how you did this. But what it does is it gives your answer a sense of sophistication. So, what I've got here is tier 2 word upgrades for various characters and qualities they have. So, let's start with the parents and the children. Feel free to screenshot this. And then, like I've done, you get to choose of all of these words which ones you actually want to use. Don't think you need to use all of them. Pick your favorite. Even if you go with just one additional word for Mr. Burling, that will raise the quality of your mark, especially if you use the word blinkered, because not only is it tier 2, it's also a metaphor. So you're going to get more marks because in order to understand this and explain it, it means you understand how Mr. Burling is deliberately not looking at the very obvious problem on his doorstep. Pompous simply means big headed, narcissistic, things like that. I love the idea that he's exempt from punishment, as in he doesn't think he's earned it, which is hilarious considering that really the person who's earned praise is Ava Smith. Mrs. Burling, haughty, blatant refusal means very obvious, clear refusal to not only acknowledge what her son is doing, but to acknowledge how cruel she is being. Now, this is an example of going the opposite way. And it'll look a little ironic, but here we're doing a tier 2 word challenge. And what I really want to say about Sybil is that she's simply cold. Now, that's the opposite here, but if you think about it, if I explain that in terms of how a normal mother is every other thing except cold, what that symbolizes is her entire failure as a mom. And that's why a tier 1 word like this is really incredibly powerful. So, total failure as a mother. Okay, so that would be my, just when I'm saying tier 2, I then give an opposite explanation. What about Sheila and Eric? Let's have a look. There are quite a few here because this is your next generation. So I like how they're less for the old folks and more for the young folks, because the young folks really are the focus of Priestley's writing. Sheila, Eric, they're juvenile at the beginning, yeah, as in they're childish. They're very obedient. I like the word, whoops, compliant. Do you know it? Compliant means you follow the rules. And like you will know this about life, sometimes it's important to break the rule, especially when that rule is inflicting harm. I'm sure you've been in a situation in your life where that word compliance has become a problem for you. Self-centered, we could say narcissistic, but if you struggle to spell that, just simply say self-centered, self-focused, self-obsessed. All of those are still correct. She's stereotypical in the beginning, so she's shallow and she's only focused on external beauty, which is why she's written as being jealous of Ava Smith. And it's not necessarily because Ava Smith is prettier, it's because Ava Smith is more confident. It's because Ava Smith knows herself. She's in the real world. She's had to grow up. They're likely the same age, Sheila and Ava Smith, but because their personal challenges have been different, Sheila has been cocooned, if you think about it that way. Whereas Ava Smith has been exposed. And the difference is that you grow quicker. Oh, there, cocooned. Look at that. Lovely repetition there for me. um, by the end, she becomes remorseful, ashamed. She owns her own guilt. She acknowledges her role. She's pliable, which means she's willing to change. It's like a bendable ruler. You know, it doesn't snap, it bends to suit the situation. She transforms. She becomes a whole new person. As in, she comes out of that cocoon and she's no longer a little a little worm, but a beautiful butterfly. Eric, a better word for drunk is inebriated. Now, please remember that he's not simply drinking to drink. It's not a laddie thing here. Here, drinking symbolizes escape. He's trying to numb himself as to the reality of where he finds himself. All right. Um, it's a cry for help. It's an escape. So it's interesting that Eric is trying to escape. Ava Smith is trying to escape. The only people who are not trying to escape are the parents because they're completely comfortable in the painful environment they've created because they rule it. They rule their little empire of pain. And Priestley's coming to knock it over as if it was a house of bricks or a Lego building. Eric is quite reckless. He's immature. These are not errors on his part. These are normal developmental roles when you are a young person. The problem is that there are consequences to this. But Eric takes those consequences on. When he sees that the girl is pregnant, he tries to give her money. You know, so it's not like he just abandons her. He's actually trying to do good by her, even though she rejects him and she says that you don't love me, so I don't want you to marry me. You know, he's quite mature about the whole thing. When he hears that she's dead and his son is dead or his daughter is dead, he is distraught. He's extraordinarily upset. Distraught is the kind of upset that changes you fundamentally as a human. So the way you experienced happiness before will never be the same. It rewrites you. Think of it as your programming. It rewrites your internal program to interpret happiness differently. It changes your definition of it. Eric will never, ever have that child back. He never got a choice in that. That's brutal. What's fascinating is to contrast him with his father, who at no point mentions his grandchild. So the fact that nothing is said, that's the message. That's the message. There's no better way than to explain cruelty than to just watch that moment where Mr. Burling simply looks at his son and says, "You stole?" That's what upsets him, not the death of his grandchild. Eric becomes shocked, furious, outraged, and then he's outraged at his father. And then he becomes confident, firm, mature, responsible. We like Eric. Eric can stay. Then you've got Gerald. Gerald, who is parallel to Eric, right? So they're like mirror images, except that Gerald fits the mold of the old and Eric fits the mold of the new, which means he doesn't fit. He's making a new mold. Gerald, confident, assured. Then he becomes distraught when he hears that Daisy Renton is dead. He's got all of these dashes in his speech that show how he can't get a single solid sentence out. And then at the end, when he realizes that the whole thing's been a farce, they've been tricked, he's very relieved. And then he tries to pull out the ring and begin the cycle of arranged convenience again, to which Sheila simply, hopefully, says, what do you think she says? Because the play doesn't say. All right. And then, of course, you've got, I'm going to do Inspector Gould first, because obviously antithesis means the direct opposite of. So these two people are like on and off, in and out, black and blue. They are complete complete total contrasts of one another on purpose. Deliberate structure by Priestley to basically show up the errors, because there's nothing better than to work out what's better than to compare them. You do this all the time when you're reviewing your purchases online. How you know you're purchasing a good product is to compare it with the others, compare the price, the style, the make, the material. You do this all the time, and that's how you determine what is the better product. And this is exactly the same thing, the same human structure that Priestley is using. Priestley doesn't have to say anything about how much he despises men like Burling. He just has to put Burling alongside men like Gore. He just has to have them stand there. Right, so Inspector is, love this, clear, simple. He's stark, which means he's very, very factual and open. He's harsh, he's logical, he's methodical, immovable. He wants to know. What's the question he repeats? What's the 3-word question he says? Every time. It's almost like a motif. He says, and that's another message. And I mean, it's a message from probably Stevenson and Macbeth and Inspector and all of the conflict poetry poets that we'll look at in a minute. Why? And so asking this about the human race. Why do we cause pain? Why do we find pleasure in gaining power despite the suffering of others? Why do we do that? Why do we pretend? Why do we insist on being right? Why do we ... And Priestley is challenging all humans to say, think about your why, because your why ultimately defines who you are. And you don't want to be like in Mr. Burling's zone, which is the shamed, unknighted man. He's just so blind, but he's willfully blind. Now, look at this. I've got Edna, who is, one word, moanly. She's mainly silent. But she is the next victim. The entire time that the parents and the family are being accused, Edna is standing in the room. She's in the corner. She's just behind the door, serving them, even whilst they're defending themselves. She's the next victim. Because if people don't listen and heed the warnings that Ava Smith's life represents, no one will save Edna. No one will bother. And that's appalling. That is appalling. So the entire way through the play, Ava Smith is belittled. They repeatedly call her a girl. They call her wretched. See there? Worthless, inferior, wretched, beyond saving. We've spoken about wretched before in previous videos. She's ignored. Even though it's very, very clear what the issue is. You must remember this. Mr. Burling knows. Everyone knows. Just like Mrs. Burling knows her son drinks too much. They know. They just pretend to not know. Because if they pretend to not know, they don't have to do anything about it. And Sheila is the voice of the new generation saying, stop. It's obvious. You can't keep staring at it. You need help. Very important. She's used and discarded. Remember, installed, when Gerald says he installed her in the apartment. And then when his friend comes back and wants his apartment back, Gerald ended it. Now, of course, this relationship is a different discussion because you've got two trapped people here. Gerald is not merely a villain. That is a very blunt way of assessing him. He is a human being who's equally trapped, which is in one of our previous videos, if you have a look. Now, she's most certainly a victim of society's greed. I mean, I've got here a victim of society's ignorance. But I don't think it is ignorance. I think it's willful blindness. I think that's what it is. So I would probably delete that word, because to say you're ignorant means you didn't know, but they do know. They 100% know, which means what they're doing is unforgivable.